Here we are, waiting to see Anjelica Huston talk about her new book, Watch Me.
I'm Alan. What's your name? We met out there. Minnie.
And I've been in love with her ever since, more so now than that day. And as I was reading the books, because I do know Anjelica fairly well, what hit me was the size, the kind of epic, mythic, just legendary size of the life, the big life that Anjelica has led and lives, and also the intimate person that we know, which seems like a contradiction. And it's really rare, but it's spectacular because she's also, a dear friend, loyal, loving, and so there's this smaller life that she lives parallel to and at the same time as the life in the book, which is, today was a sad day because all of us fans of film lost a genius, Mike Nichols, and in Anjelica's case, a dear friend. And as I was reading the book, I saw that they had met, I believe, in 1973, or in New York City, and I know that you just saw Mike last week.
Yeah, I was just in New York for the beginning of my book tour, and I was with Mike a week ago, happier than he'd ever been in his life. We sat side by side, and we laughed and giggled all night, and he was madly in love with Diane Sawyer. Told me he would go to the beach and, listen to the Beach Boys, and it was all good. It was a very novel way of living, and of course, everyone was beautiful in California. Everyone had a suntan, and they looked great, and they were up for anything. No one did much, so you could stay up really late and have a whole lot of fun.
Wake up late the next day. Yeah. That's why I was jealous. And you were coming here, you were incredibly young at the time, and coming, as the last book ended, out of a really traumatic kind of a intense relationship with a photographer in New York, and so it must have felt like a release and also a refuge, and you were protected here and all that stuff. But at that time there was no work agenda from you. When I read the book, it feels like you just really were happy to be here, and this was going to be fun.
That's right. I'd gone on this holiday to Mexico with my father, who decided to sort of try to approve of my then boyfriend, who was some 22 years older than I was, and basically a bipolar schizophrenic. I say this laughing, but... And anyway, as fate would have it, at the end of book one, we have this terrible kind of quarrel in Mexico, and we fly back to California, and I'm supposed to go on back to New York with Bob Richardson, who was the name of the boyfriend. And I decided to part with him the night before, and it was a night of torture, but anyway, when we arrived at LAX, and we were standing there by the baggage carousel, I decided there was no way that I was going to go on back to... when he was shooting The List of Adrian Messenger, And I remember coming out, and I think he might even have been at one point planning the Misfits, and I came out to visit with my mother. But I didn't spend any time in California. I was born here, but I didn't spend any time here growing up.
So it was new.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I was on page 137. So
No, it was funny the other day because people are apt to kind of come in immediately with that question. So what about Jack? Like, you know, I haven't had any life after or before. And I found myself getting a bit defensive. And then the interviewer said, well, it's on like page 2.
you wrote it.
Okay. I guess.
It appeared to meet you, it felt like you were comfortable in that role or whatever, but in the book it seems like there was a little more stress there became a little bit more stress about wanting to present yourself as doing your own thing.
Yeah. Well, living with Jack was sort of a combination of a wonderful sense of ease and waking up quite late. Jack had quite a busy agenda and that everyone in the world wanted to work with him. My own agenda was a little bit more, it was a little bit less. I wanted to act, but I acted in a movie with my father directing when I was 16. That wasn't a very pleasant experience, and it took me a while to get my courage back up. I didn't have a lot of confidence, and after Jack and I met and got together, actually, it wasn't hard to lie around his beautiful house up on Mulholland Drive, soaking in the rays and, going to great rock and roll concerts. I had a pretty good time. It's hard to complain. I wanted to work. But that was sort of the ethos of the 70s for me, was mostly kind of going to great places and having a good time with Jack. It wasn't hard. The problem for me was that I do have this kind of strange underlying ambition that caused me to sometimes want to rebel against the easy life, or wanted to challenge myself a bit more.
Well, it was your father and Jack, in the movie, obviously. And you described that scene of sitting down between the two of them and Harry Dean being there and all that, and your father doing a line from the movie.
Yeah, I was invited to set. I can't remember whether it was Dad or Jack who said, come along to lunch, and, I arrived. And I don't like being on anyone else's set. I don't even like being on sets of movies that I'm working on if I'm not working that day. I'm very wary about walking in on other people's scenes and stuff. So they were in an orchard at a long wooden table, and Dad was seated across the table, and I sat down next to Jack, and Roman was at the head of the table, and lunch was being served, and Dad kind of drew back like this and said, I hear you've been sleeping with my daughter. This is a long, wavy pause. Mr. Gibbs. So, and everyone had a good laugh at my expense. Having given me the book, Preetzi's Honors, said to me the next day, so what do you think about Mayro's Preetzi? And I went, it's great, it's a fantastic part. And he said, what do you think about your dad to direct, Jack to co-star? And I went, oh, no. But I knew at that point that, this one would be really foolish to turn down. But on the other hand, when he said, okay, we have to go down to Mexico to talk to your father, we've got to get Jack down to Mexico. And I said, John, I'm not going to go down to Mexico to persuade Jack to work with Dad. I just don't want to be in the middle of this. I said, what do you mean? Want to get this done? I said, if I go down to Mexico, I'm going to hear Jack's problems with Dad, Dad's problems with Jack. I'm going to be sandwiched between these two big rocks. I don't want to do it. He said, I'll see you tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. Be ready. We're going down to Puerto Vallarta. I said, I'm not going. 6 o'clock in the morning, he shows up on my doorstep. I'm in my nightdress. He says, what? You're not ready. I said, I told you I'm not going. I'm not going to do it. Anyway, we had a brief argument. He turned on his heel, down my drive, left for Puerto Vallarta. When he arrived at the airport, he found Jack buying huaraches in the shop at the airport, thrilled. He and Dad had spent the better part of 4 days watching young female gymnasts on the satellite field to the Olympics, had basically fallen in love and agreed to do Prizzi's Honor, which Jack now understood was a comedy. He'd never known it was a comedy. I think he hadn't quite agreed to wear a wig, but Dad had him like under his thumb. The whole thing was set. So it was great.
You did
It
your
all
job.
got done. Yeah, I did my job.